These words threw the crowd into an uproar. Among them, Luo Binghe also stood shocked. Wouldn't use a single hand? Sha Hualing snorted, thinking Shen Qingqiu was being full of himself, but she was also secretly filled with endless glee. If her side could win a match so easily, why wouldn't they go for it? Well, since Senior Shen is so ready, let us start, she said hurriedly. A number of bystanders realized then that this girl was actually quite brazen. Though her manner was pure and innocent, her words were vicious and sinister, and she rushed to take advantage of others. As a reader enjoying the drama, Shen Qingqiu had come away with one impression, but experiencing the situation for himself, he came away with another. He'd never really been charmed by Sha Hualing's way of dealing with things, but between her youth and her daintiness, he had at least been able to force himself to regard her behavior as a cute Lolita sort of character, until now. Under all those gazes, Shen Qingqiu stayed true to his words and didn't draw his sword. Instead, he played with the fan in his hand, smiling at the elder single arm. Elder single arm only had one arm, but that didn't even slightly hinder his ability to swing his beheading saber. But his savage swing didn't actually hit its target. He whipped around to find Shen Qingqiu was already standing behind him, still smiling. In truth, Shen Qingqiu's face was getting sore. However, Xiuya had already left its sheath. Shen Qingqiu hadn't directly touched his sword at all. His left hand had subtly formed a sword seal, commanding Xiuya to fly and turn over, brandishing itself. Elder Single Arm's eyes were struck with pain from the flashes of the sword's snow-white gleam. He rushed to lift his saber and attack again. Saber and sword clashed in a succession of incessant ringing clangs, while sparks sprayed and danced. Everyone could not tear their eyes away. This competition was truly good to see and beautiful. The first good to see referred to the strength of both parties and their martial skill. The second beautiful referred to the visual effect, which was extremely gorgeous. It was particularly so for Shen Qingqiu, who moved with such skill and ease in his pure and scholarly way, surrounded by the glint and flash of blades. On top of this, he continued to gracefully and leisurely fan himself with his paper fan. It was as if any instant he would compose a poem within 7 steps, like a figure of a legend. Such utterly breathtaking style. No, achieving this level of badass was far too perfect. As Luo Binghe watched, his heart practically galloped and his soul trembled. He had known Shen Qingqiu was incredible, but he had never anticipated that he was this incredible. So strong. Surrounded by the cheers of the sect's disciples, Shen Qingqiu attained a complete victory in the first match. At this moment, Shen Qingqiu could understand a little of the original's goods do-or-dive drive to be a pretentious prick. It was so satisfying to please the crowd. The disciples' gaze of awe formed a sea of sparkling stars. What an inspiring experience! Shen Qingqiu was certain now a Scum villain could also gain reputation points. At the same time, the system also gave him good news. Demonic invasion of the Immortals Mountain. First match of the competition. Shen Qingqiu's victory. Martial skill rating plus 50 B points plus 50. Shen Qingqiu's pleased smile didn't last long. The system's next notification came like a slap to the face. System alert! If Luo Binghe does not participate in the competition, 1,000 points will be deducted from the protagonist's satisfaction points. What? Completely unprepared, Shen Qingqiu turned pale with shock. He'd been laboring to earn satisfaction points, huffing and puffing like an old ox dragging a broken cart, and only managed to earn somewhere in the 300s. And in an instant he risked losing 1,000? System, are you trying to get people killed? This competition was an important part of the plot. At the same time, it also served as a small early-stage climax for the debut of 2 female leads and pitted their splendor against each other. And the consequences of it later enabled the protagonist to get an underling and also allowed him to learn a few secret techniques. All important things. If Luo Binghe didn't make it on stage this time, he would miss the limelight and be unable to grab everyone's attention. Hence, negative 1,000 satisfaction points. But if Shen Qingqiu named him a sect representative and sent him out to fight, what would he be doing? Of course, the original Shen Qingqiu pushed Luo Binghe onto the battlefield because he was shameless. He didn't care about the sect's reputation. He hated Luo Binghe to the bone, enough to want to vicariously torture him via the hands of demons. The current Shen Qingqiu didn't share any of those motives. And at the end of everything, why was someone else responsible for the oh-so-mighty protagonist's satisfaction points? Shen Qingqiu was still angrily rebuking the system for its unscientific approach when the time came for the start of the second match. Sha Hualing had been afraid that Shen Qingqiu would fight all 3 matches himself and swiftly said, "If the same representative competes in all 3 matches, we would lose the chance to truly learn from each other, don't you think? I will be my people's representative for the second match." No doubt, Sha Hualing had entered first because she believed in her own strength, but she also likely thought that Shen Qingqiu wouldn't use his senior position to bully a girl who was his junior. Shen Qingqiu didn't want to concern himself with her thoughts at all and demonstrated as much. Even if he'd originally had the ambition to fight all 3 matches to earn martial ability points and reputation, the system's notification had extinguished those hopes. However, the second match did have an impressive, attention-worthy highlight. "You've all heard her," said Shen Qingqiu. "Who is willing to bear the heavy duty?" Even though he was asking all the disciples of the sect, his gaze fell on a certain pocket of the crowd. Within that pocket stood a collection of graceful female disciples. Without a doubt, they all belonged to Xianshu Peak. In this group of pretty girls, each fairer, more beautiful, and more refined than the last, one stood out, a veil draped over her face. Immediately after Shen Qingqiu asked this question, she slowly stepped forward from the crowd. Despite himself, a burst of excitement flooded in Shen Qingqiu. "It's here! It's almost here! The 2 biggest female leads in this book! Their first one-on-one!" Liu Mingyan was a great beauty, a heaven and earth-shattering great beauty at the sight of whom both gods and ghosts would weep. Even though she belonged to Xianshu Peak, which had produced generations of beautiful women since ancient times, she was still a crane amongst chickens, rising above and beyond them all. Her older brother was Baijian Peak's master, but because she was younger, she'd entered the sect later and become a disciple of Xianshu Peak's next generation. Because her face was excessively beautiful, capable of stealing souls, she had to hide it behind a veil all year round, akin to a flower on a high cliff, unattainable and out of reach. In brief, for the purposes of describing this character's appearance, Master Aeroplane Shooting Towards the Sky had probably used every single flattering vocabulary word and idiom he'd learned from elementary through to high school. He must have had it hard. Shen Qingqiu was very fond of this female lead, and it wasn't only because Liu Mingyan's beauty points were the highest. It was also because she had great poise. She always understood the big picture and grasped the general situation, and her conduct was fair and honest. Even in Luo Binghe's gigantic harem, a wife with both intelligence and moral character was rare. There was one more appeal factor. Liu Mingyan was the only female character for whom Aeroplane Shooting Towards the Sky didn't write detailed sex scenes. Many readers had been highly dissatisfied with this arrangement, to the point they spammed the comments with their ranting. But this had given Liu Mingyan something no other female lead had, an image as clear as ice and pure as jade. Can't be helped. The unobtainable ones are always the best, Shen Qingqiu thought. This was what made the second match worth watching. An evil demoness naturally demanded a righteous saintess as a rival. Every man dreamed of being caught between an angel and a devil. To watch them jealously vie with each other over him one moment, then risk life and limb for his sake in the next, that was the highest, most sacred, perverted fantasy of every male organism. He could get drunk off of the wild and tamed charm of the wicked seductress, and at the same time his heart would ache for the austere taste of the pure saintess who kept pulling him closer only to push him away. One had to admit, Great Master Airplane was generally good at nailing what people found satisfying. Shen Qingqiu couldn't help giving Luo Binghe another glance. Luo Binghe found it very hard to not care about that gaze. Why exactly did Shen Qingqiu keep looking at him? Was it possible that Shi Zun really had an interest in him? What a pity that under Great Master Airplane shooting towards the sky's pen, battles between female characters usually lacked any standout moments, other than randomly stripping for the male gaze. No, actually, if Shen Qingqiu thought about it, as written by the Great Master, none of the battles had any memorable moments. It was always the same tied phrases like, "Light like a lightning flash, colorful as a rainbow, sword glares of every color, horrifying as a monster," etc. After a time equal to the burning of a few sticks of incense, Liu Mingyan lost. After all, at this time she hadn't yet gone to Wanjian Peak to claim her personal sword. Even though she did her utmost best, her weapon was only a slender ordinary blade, while Sha Hualing was already a demon saintess with saintly weapons in ready supply at her beck and call. Naturally, there was a gap between their abilities. Liu Mingyan approached Shen Qingqiu. "This disciple has lost. For failing the mission, I humbly request your punishment." When no one else would come forward, you assumed this responsibility, said Shen Qingqiu. This fight would never have been easy, whether you attained victory or suffered defeat. Both were acceptable outcomes. You need not to be concerned. You need only take back the victory in the future. Having taken the second round, Sha Hualing's face was glowing, and she laughed delicately. This match will decide the overall victor. I wonder who Senior Shen will send out next. This time, you must choose carefully." Shen Qingqiu stood with his hands clasped behind his back. "The young miss need not to worry," he said with a profound air. "I have long decided on a representative, and can guarantee that, no matter if he wins or loses, he will become your life's bane." Sha Hualing took these words as merely his attempt at intimidation. She clapped her hands. "Which brave warrior will take the third match?" From the crowd of demons, a giant elder slowly walked out. He was giant because he really was unfairly tall. Definitely, more than 3 meters. Built like a bear, he had a head of disheveled hair and armor that covered him from head to toe with spikes. He dragged a giant iron hammer behind him. Shen Qingqiu was positive that the ground quaked lightly with each step he took. "First, to give you all a warning, the spikes on Elder Skyhammer Tian Chui's armor are coated with a highly toxic poison," Sha Hualing said gleefully. "This poison is ineffective against demons, but if it enters a human body, there is no cure." The first thought Shen Qingqiu had was, "Shit, Great Master Airplane shooting towards the sky, don't just name things whatever without thinking. Calling the one with only one arm Elder Single Arm, then calling the one whose weapon was a giant hammer Elder Sky Hammer. You literally suck at giving character names." Meanwhile, Sha Hualing's words had triggered a wave of rage in the onlookers. "Piece of shit demoness! If you want to compete, then compete. How can you say it's fair to use poison?" "I didn't conceal the information, did I?" Sha Hualing retorted. "If you think it's unfair, or are afraid of losing your life, then forfeit the match and admit defeat. Then you won't need to compete anymore. We demons won't mock you. It's human nature to value your lives, but my people value glory over everything else." Between the demons' roaring laughter and the disciples' cries of condemnation, Shen Qingqiu rubbed the crease between his brows and slightly sighed. From the reader's perspective, where you could live in the fantasy of being the protagonist, of course you'd love a woman like Sha Hualing and find her satisfying. But once you were a person facing off with her in reality, he couldn't believe anyone could bring themselves to like her. It wasn't that she was different from how she had been described in the story. In fact, the problem was that she was exactly as advertised. cruel and vicious, combined with an infatuation that made her throw her brain away. If you weren't the protagonist, you'd better run the hell away. The moment you threatened her or Luo Binghe's interests even the tiniest bit, she'd want your life. She wouldn't even think of alternatives like chopping off your hands or feet or gouging out your eyes. Even if you were her father, you had to be careful. In the original work, to help Luo Binghe gain standing in the demon realm, she backstabbed her father. Shen Qingqiu remained inflappable in the face of Sha Hualing's provocations. He maintained his silence for a stretch, using the time to stare intently at the crowd of demons. Finally, he turned around and fixed his eyes firmly in someone's direction. Luo Binghe, come here.